Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking the organizing committee, particularly Dr. Mohammed Hassanein, for inviting me to participate in the DAR conference. It's really an honor. Thank you very much, Mohammed. My talk today is going to be about fasting Ramadan in adolescents with type 1 diabetes. And I'm going to start by saying a few words about Ramadan literature, and the whole new fascinating idea initiated by Mohammed Hassanein and many other colleagues about Ramadanology. And in that regard, I would like to flag up this slide that has been designed, drawn, and published by our colleague, Dr. Salim Pshia, showing how the interest in Ramadanology increased over the last decades. More recently, studies in Ramadan became interesting because it shows how the human model during the fasting state can be a very good model for studying the physiology and the pathology in humans. Now, while the increase in Ramadan literature has been very noticeable in adults, the literature in pediatrics remained scarce. So I attempted to look at the literature some time ago in a previous DAR conference, and this slide is what has been showed by me as a summary of what was there in the literature about Ramadan in children and adolescents with type 1 diabetes. So I looked at the latest 18 years until 2018, and it was a little bit disappointing because the studies were scattered, one study a year, two studies a year, and then it became more popular. So I've got 4 studies and 6 studies, but nowhere near what we have seen in the adult literature. I looked individually at all these studies throughout the global literature, and I put here the names of the authors. What I'd like to point out is to these numbers flagged in red, and those numbers reflect the number of population or the study population throughout those 18 years. So you can see that the numbers are 17, 63, 9 case reports, nothing really impressive in terms of number and size. And within that being studied in Ramadan in adolescents with diabetes, I will flag it up here under headings. So are adolescents willing to fast? This has been studied. Are they willing? Are they able to fast? Is it safe to fast? So a little bit of physiology and pathology there, complication of diabetes, of fasting, looking at HbA1c and lipids, a bit of technology related to insulin administration and regimes, and then adjustments that might or might not be required in fasting. And also there has been lots of interest in how to utilize technology to improve safety in Ramadan. And of course, there has been lots of studies interviewing healthcare physicians, looking at their perception, practice, and attitude. While it's great that we are seeing in the literature some pediatric data, however, from what I flagged up, what I felt here, and I hope you'll agree with me, that majority of those studies are performed in single centers, the study population is small, most of the design is retrospective, and the concept is always repetitive, yet the results are non-reproducible. So there's lack of agreement, not only in knowledge, but we remain unsure about the best way to advise these people. So let me take you from 2018 until date and go through what are the advances that we had since that time. when I was preparing for this talk a few days ago, I went to PubMed and put these keywords: Ramadan, fasting, children, adolescents. And when I clicked, I would like to share with you this interesting graph, because you can see how there's paucity of data here, completely few, one or two studies. And then you can see a surge here from 2020 onwards, despite the pandemic. So there has been better interest when it is concerning children and adolescents. And I'd like to highlight some important publications during this period after 2018. Of course, with all the pride in the world, I would like to flag this international guidelines that our team has led, and this is published in the prestigious Pediatric Diabetes. And these guidelines were launched in Boston just before COVID hit in 2019. And then we gathered again in another task force and we reviewed these guidelines. So 2022, we came up with updated guideline, and the main difference or the main differences in the updated guideline is that we kept the same emphasis under Ramadan fasting, but we also included other religions, which we thought is very interesting. We had colleagues who were Christians, Jewish, others who practice Hinduism and other religions, and we talked about the different types of fasting in young people, and this was the main difference or the main update in the new guidelines. Now, putting guidelines aside, the newer studies, again, I will put them under categories. So the first area that was explored in the newer studies is again under this similar concept. So is it safe to fast? Youngsters with type 1 diabetes, is it safe to fast? So this is a study from Kuwait that came out in 2019. Again, a humble number of 50 patients. And the conclusion from this study was, yes, it is safe for them to fast, whether they are on technology of insulin pump or using the traditional multiple daily injections, but education is important. And then another study came out by Dr. Zabin. She's a very famous endocrinologist from Bangladesh, and she's written lots and lots of publication in Ramadan. So Dr. Zabin looked at 74 patients, and her conclusion was interesting. She said she collaborated with people from Australia, including Kim Donhughes, the past president of ISPAD. And Dr. Zabin's conclusion was, it doesn't matter how controlled / not controlled people are. They can fast Ramadan. Education remains to be the cornerstone of safe fasting. So poorly controlled diabetes is not a contraindication for fasting in adolescents. But then we had this paper coming out from our neighbors at Imperial College of London, led by Tawfiq Muammar, friend and a colleague, who were sort of had similar results. Yes, it's safe to fast Ramadan. However, their recommendation was completely the contrary to what Dr. Zabin said, in the sense that Dr. Muammar said, no, we better discourage these children if they have poorly controlled diabetes. So what I'm trying to say is we still have contradictory recommendations and results. What has been noticeable newly is interest of physiology studies recently when it comes to Ramadan, like impact of exercise on fasting. So this one study talked about the cardiorespiratory capacity in healthy boys observing Ramadan, and another study looked at the spirometric data assessing respiratory function, and another interesting study looked specifically at people who are practicing tennis and training tennis and looked at their motor, mental, imaginary while they are fasting. I thought this is very interesting. Another subheading of the new studies is education. So I've seen this interesting study putting together, it's more of a review rather than study, putting together many frequently answered questions, asked questions about medical nutrition therapy in type 1 diabetes. And there was a big chunk on fasting in that one. And then back to our friend and colleague, Dr. Salam Bshia, who also explored education and perception of healthcare professionals. And he showed that there was wide agreement amongst the knowledge gaps in management of fasting. Technology, there's always a share for technology when it comes to Ramadan fasting. So this study, again, a new one, 2022, again, small number, looked at people, young people, fasting Ramadan, showing us some positive results about safety and ability, utilizing continuous glucose monitoring. And perhaps it's worth also mentioning this randomized control trial led by my friend Dr. Nancy Berberi, when she utilized the 780G advanced hybrid closed loop. I'm not going to say a word about this because Nancy is going to be talking to you about it. COVID-19, it has its share even in the Ramadan literature. So I've seen a couple of studies related to COVID and young people and what happens to them when they fasted during COVID. This study showed that HbA1c goes a little bit up. And this one was interesting, again, by our colleague from Bangladesh, Dr. Zabin, who looked at, she utilized telemonitoring and teleconsultation for young people who are fasting Ramadan. And she showed good results if you follow patients by teleconsultation during COVID. So my last couple of slides. The first one is I would like, as much as it's exciting and interesting, Ramadan in young people, adolescents and children in particularly, there's lots of limitations still. Sample size has always been small throughout whom we saw in the literature. Majority of these studies are retrospective in design, and we all know the challenges and the limitation with the retrospective design. Now, it's very interesting that Ramadan is, there are differences. There are country-specific differences in terms of physical exercise, schooling. So it's very majority of these studies done in different countries, the results might be impacted by these factors. And then because Ramadan changes in terms of season, again, the conclusions might not be universally applicable. One very important issue that I personally agree with strongly is the physician and the diabetes educator own knowledge, attitude, beliefs, perception, and practice, because there's a little bit of subjective issue here with Ramadan and how we counsel patients. So that can be variable. We don't have clear-cut guidelines and guidance still for young people. How much of research we can do in children, we always have our hands tied up because of ethical approvals. And then there's always this fear of results that might arise because of cultural and religion sensitivities. So there's lots of limitation. So ladies and gentlemen, this is my last slide. And I think we go back to the first square we started with. The recommendations are that we need further multicentric, well-designed studies. We don't need lots of studies, but we need better ones. It doesn't matter if we are studying highly sophisticated machines or we are studying still the mixed insulins and the basic syringe and needles. What matters is how we design our studies so that we can take all children and adolescents throughout the globe on how to fast and how to fast safely. And with that, I thank you very much indeed. And I would love to hear any questions that you might have. Thank you.